It's kind of hard to imagine now, but there was a time before social media, before endless streaming services, a time when live television was everything. It was our shared experience. It brought us together for the triumphs, but also for the tragedies, all in real time. We're about to look at those moments when that live feed captured something so raw, so completely unexpected, that it changed how we all looked at the camera forever.
And that's really the core question here, isn't it? What happens when the script gets tossed out the window and raw, unfiltered reality just bleeds right through the screen? It forces us to deal with not just what happened, but with the act of watching itself. We're going to explore 4 times this happened and how each one left a permanent mark on history.
So, our first case, it starts in the middle of one of the biggest traumas in American history, the assassination of a president. But the story was nowhere near over. In fact, the next shocking chapter was about to unfold live for everyone to see in the basement of a police station. Okay, so just try to imagine the mood. The entire country is just reeling. On Friday, President Kennedy is killed. By Saturday, they have a suspect, this guy Lee Harvey Oswald. And so on Sunday morning, the press is all gathered for what's supposed to be just a routine prisoner transfer. The whole country is glued to their TVs, just desperate for answers for some kind of resolution. And then, complete chaos. As Oswald is being led through the basement, this man, a local nightclub owner named Jack Ruby, just lunges out of the crowd of reporters, and in one unbelievable moment, he fires a pistol right into Oswald's stomach. This wasn't a movie, it wasn't some TV drama, it was a real-time murder, broadcast live into millions of homes. And in this just grim twist of fate, Oswald was rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital, the exact same hospital where President Kennedy had been pronounced dead only 48 hours before. The man accused of the crime died in the very same place. It closed one horrific chapter while ripping open 1,000 new questions that, honestly, we're still asking today. Now, for our next story, we're shifting from a huge public event to a deeply, deeply personal tragedy. And this time, the person in front of the camera wasn't the subject of the news. She was the one reporting it. This is the story of Christine Chubbuck. To even begin to understand what happened on July 15th, 1974, you have to understand the private pain Christine was going through. And remember, this was a time when talking about mental health was just not something people did. At 29, she was really struggling. People close to her said she battled severe depression, felt incredibly lonely, and had just gotten medical news that made her feel like her dream of having a family was impossible. She'd even tried to take her own life once before, 4 years earlier. So that morning, she's on the air, live, and a film reel for a story about a local shooting gets jammed. Without missing a beat, Christine just looks straight into the camera and starts reading from a script she brought with her. And she spoke these words just so calmly, so deliberately, that nobody had any idea what was coming next. Right after she finished that sentence, she pulled a .38 caliber revolver from under her desk, put it behind her right ear, and pulled the trigger. The broadcast immediately cut to black, but for everyone watching and for the crew in that studio, the image was burned into their minds forever. And this is what's so staggering, the level of planning. When her coworkers rushed over to her desk, they found the script she'd been reading from. It didn't just have the words she spoke. It also had a complete news report written in the third person about her own suicide. It was meant for whichever anchor had to take her place. She had scripted her own final story, right down to the very end. This question really marks a shift in what we're talking about. We've seen the news capture violence, and we've seen a journalist create it. But what happens when the state, the government itself, uses the power of live television, not to inform people, but to terrify them? For this next broadcast, we're going to Libya in the early 1980s, under the rule of Muammar Gaddafi. At that time and place, television wasn't just a medium for information, it was a weapon of the state. And it was used to make a horrifying public example of a man named Sadiq al-Shwaidi. Just picture the scene. It was designed for maximum intimidation. This wasn't some quiet courtroom. It was a basketball stadium in Benghazi, and it was packed with thousands of students who were forced to be there. And right in the middle of it all, on his knees, was al-Shwehi, an engineer who had been accused of the worst possible crime, plotting against Gaddafi. The whole thing was a show trial, and it was broadcast live across the entire country. At one point, a couple of brave young men actually stood up and pleaded for mercy, but they were shot down immediately. And then a gallows was brought out into the middle of the stadium. Live on television, in front of all those students and the whole nation, Sadiq al-Shweidi was hanged. It was a brutal, terrifying message to anyone who might even think of opposing the regime. So we've gone from a state using TV to send a message of terror to our final story about one man using it to send his own message of protest. This one involves an American politician, a press conference, and an absolutely desperate act to control his own story, right up to the very, very end. This is the story of Pennsylvania State Treasurer R. Bud Dwyer. To really get what happened next, you have to understand that there were two completely different realities clashing here. In 1986, Dwyer was convicted in a bribery scandal. He was looking at up to 55 years in prison. To the state, he was a corrupt politician, but Dwyer fiercely, passionately maintained his innocence. He believed he was framed, the victim of a political witch hunt. For him, this wasn't just about avoiding prison, it was about his entire legacy. So, the day before he was scheduled to be sentenced, Dwyer called a press conference. He read this long, rambling speech, again saying he was innocent. And then, everything changed. He calmly handed out 3 sealed envelopes to his staffers. Then he reached into a 4th envelope and pulled out a .357 Magnum revolver. The room just erupted into panic. People were yelling, begging him to stop. But he was calm. As the cameras were rolling, he took his own life. His final, horrifying act was captured by multiple news cameras, and in the hours that followed, TV stations all across Pennsylvania, and then the country, had to make an impossible decision. What do we show our viewers? Many of them ended up airing the graphic footage, which made Dwyer's death one of the most widely seen and fiercely debated moments in the history of television. You know, these 4 events, they're all so different on the surface, but they're all connected by the one thing that brought them into our living rooms: live television. These weren't just news stories, they became these shared national traumas, and they left these deep, lasting scars on an entire generation of viewers and on the news industry itself. The legacy of these broadcasts was this huge, painful moment of reckoning for the media. Suddenly, everyone was asking, what is the responsibility of the news? Is there a line between informing the public and traumatizing them? And the result of all that debate was the widespread adoption of broadcast delays. The very same 7-second delay we all just take for granted on live TV today. See, back then, the gatekeepers were a small group of network executives. They were the ones who had to make those incredibly difficult calls. But today, anyone with a smartphone can start a live stream and broadcast to the entire world with just the push of a button. The power to broadcast is in all of our hands now. So the question isn't just what should be shown anymore. It's, in a world with no gatekeepers, who is even left to make that choice?